Welcome back to the channel. My name is Steven. I'm a pharmacist and I own 52 units of real estate. So today I want to talk about how I hire pharmacists as a pharmacy director. So for those of you who are new to my journey, I graduated pharmacy school back in 2013 and I became a director of pharmacy in 2017 at Kindred Hospital in Northern California. And I was 27 years old at the time because I graduated at 23 years old, and I pursued a master's in public health degree, which helped me land my first director position, albeit at a very small hospital with a staff of 14. I then went on to become a regional director of pharmacy at a hospital where I oversaw 2 hospitals with a staff of around 70, and kind of hopped around to various positions once I relocated to Southern California, where I got laid off multiple times. And now basically where my current job is, present day, don't want to disclose the hospital for privacy, but we have about close to 200 staff now. So I've been in pharmacy leadership positions for about 7 years now, almost 8. So I've hired a lot of pharmacists. I've interviewed for a lot of jobs myself, between interviewing for pharmacist jobs and interviewing for pharmacy leadership positions. I've hired pharmacists, I've fired pharmacists, I've interviewed myself a lot. I've done a lot of interviews myself for pharmacist positions as well as pharmacy leadership positions, because it's really competitive to get pharmacy management positions. Usually they hire internally, so it's really rare for an external candidate like myself to get hired. So let me kind of share the thought process that I have when hiring. So obviously, like with any job, the best source is a referral. So if I have a good employee who is doing well in the organization, who knows the culture, knows the hospital, has proven that they are productive, that they're a stronger pharmacist or technician, then if they give me a referral, I'll definitely take a look at their resume, and if it seems reasonable, I typically would do a phone interview, for example. And from the phone interview, I'm basically just trying to gauge how they communicate, how they present themselves, what experience they have that maybe wasn't reflected on the resume. And if that looks good, I usually bring them to like an on-site interview. So for me, when I'm looking at hiring a pharmacist for a hospital position, which I've been my whole career, so obviously what I look at is, obviously having a residency is helpful, right? Like, if you have a residency, you did 1 year after graduation, or sometimes 2 years. So for me, residency is a plus. It's not mandatory. I myself didn't do a residency, but for me, if I'm looking for like a hospital pharmacist position, which is your typical kind of operations-based position, obviously I'm gonna favor people who have residencies, especially people who've done residencies at larger institutions, because typically they get a lot of exposure and they've seen a lot, right? So it doesn't mean that small hospitals or residencies are not good, but just the exposure may be a little bit more limited with that. So, obviously for a regular position, hey, I'm open. Obviously first choice would be like residents, right? Or people who have residency experience. And this only really matters in your first few years as a inpatient pharmacist. Once you've had like 5, 6, 7 years as an inpatient pharmacist, at this point, your residency doesn't really matter as much. It's really what have you done as a pharmacist, right? So I kind of want to make that point clear. So a residency is beneficial for those who are graduating, want to apply for a hospital pharmacy position, and gives them kind of that leg up because they did that extra year of training and extra year of clinical training. So, but if it's been like, if let's say I have someone who's applying who has 5 years of experience and they've been at a decent hospital versus someone who just graduated as a new resident, I would still favor somebody who has 5 years of hospital experience, right? And this is just for your typical hospital inpatient operations pharmacist position. So So that's kind of my thought process. Ideally, if I have a resident, which is preferable, or if someone has like, a few years of experience under their belt and maybe no residency, I would consider them as well. To me, they're kind of equal footing for inpatient hospital pharmacist position. If it's for like a clinical position, then obviously somebody who did a first year residency, a second year residency specifically. So let's say I'm hiring like an infectious disease pharmacist. Obviously, it'd be more favorable if you did a second year residency specializing in infectious disease, right? That gives you a leg up. Or if you worked as an infectious disease pharmacist before, and obviously you're up there as well. But if you're just kind of like a normal pharmacist who has a few years of regular inpatient pharmacy experience, you may be a little bit lower on the totem pole if I had to pick, right? Unless maybe you were, working in the hospital already, you've been helping out, and then it's just a seamless transition. So that's another thing that I factor. So, for me, residency is not required, but obviously it does give you a leg up to have a residency versus not to have one. So for me, I didn't do a residency. So this is the kind of path that I had to go through to get a job. So for me, I had to be willing to work graveyard, number one. So I'd be willing to work start at 11 p.m. and finish at 7:30 a.m. in the morning, 7 on, 7 off, get a graveyard differential of $5 to $20, depending on which hospital you work at. And you do that for 2 years, and eventually either you move up to a daytime position or a very varied shift position where you're doing half AM, half PM. So maybe you'll start at 7 AM one week, start 3 PM the next week. Or if that current hospital you're at doesn't have it, you can just apply to another hospital that has a varied position, because now you have experience, right? And what I love about graveyard is that it teaches you to think big picture, because when I was a graveyard pharmacist, it was a 500-bed hospital at Santa Clara Valley Medical. There was 2 pharmacists and 1 technician, and we were running the whole hospital. So I was verifying orders for every unit. I was verifying orders for the emergency department, for the ICU, for the pediatric ICU, for the burn unit, everything. And it's a level 1 trauma. So you see trauma patients that come in, all times of the day. So you get a lot of exposure, and so you get a lot of clinical exposure as well as you get a lot of operations exposure, because you have to manage everything yourself. You're doing sterile compounding, you're checking drugs, you're triaging phone calls, you're answering clinical questions. So that's how I was able to really learn a lot. I was basically a graveyard pharmacist for my first 2 years. So that's the first way of getting your foot in the door about residency, is be willing to work graveyard, right? Number 2 is you just have to be willing to relocate to a less desirable area, right? So if you live in California and you work as a pharmacist in California, then what are the areas that are undesirable? It's going to be Redding, Merced, Santa Rosa, up north, right? Way up north. King City, that's where I had a job, right? Bakersfield, Apple Valley, so you're going to look at these really remote areas of California and just think it's temporary, right? So you just go there. You work there for 1 to 2 years, you get some experience under your belt, and then you just apply for a job in your hometown. That's exactly what I did. I worked in the middle of nowhere in King City for almost 2 years. And after 2 years, I had experience, and I became a graveyard pharmacist at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. So you just have to sacrifice it for about, I'd say, 2 years to get that experience under your belt. At that point, you can apply to multiple jobs, and it opens up your opportunities significantly, right? And that's exactly what I did. So I was actually working in a remote area for 2 years to get experience, and I worked as a graveyard pharmacist for 2 years in San Jose, where I grew up. So that's just kind of the sacrifice you have to be willing to make. So that's why I tell people, don't be discouraged if you don't get a residency. Just be willing to relocate to the middle of nowhere for 1 to 2 years, get experience, and once you have the experience, you can apply to a job where you want to be. I've seen it happen so many times. So that's what I would recommend. Or another way is, you want to work, if you want to get your foot into the inpatient pharmacy setting. Let's just say you're a retail pharmacist, working at Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid. Obviously you can check out my video talking about how I got fired from Rite Aid, or from Walgreens, excuse me. But let's just say you've been at CVS, Walgreens for 3 years, and you're shoot, when I apply for jobs, I'm not gonna be as competitive, which you won't be, right? Like I said, I'd rather hire a new grad who's fresh versus someone who's been at Walgreens for a few years and lost their clinical knowledge, and may or may not be as motivated to learn, right? Varies. But if that happened to you, what I would do, another alternative is you can work for long-term care, right? So I was a pharmacy director at Kindred, which is a long-term acute care hospital. And, it's not as acute patients. So they're like not sick enough to be in the hospital, but they're still sick enough to but they're too sick to be in like a nursing home. So it's kind of like a middle ground where you get a lot of exposure to like the same things you do in an inpatient pharmacy. So you can work there for a few years, get experience, and then go to a hospital. Or you can work for like a long-term care infusion where you're just checking a lot of IVs, because if you have that IV experience, it kind of gives you a leg up when you want to apply for like a hospital pharmacy position. So, just consider those hospitals like Kindred. There's a lot of long-term care, home infusion areas. Like that gets you experience in your belt. So when you apply for a position, I would definitely consider that type of position. Right. So to kind of summarize, if you've been at Walgreens for a few years and you want to get out, be willing to work graveyard. Be willing to relocate to a less desirable area of California, for example, like Redding, Bakersfield, Apple Valley, Paradise, whatever, right? Be willing to, just do it for a year or two, get experience, and then go back, right? Or be open to like working at like long-term care or a long-term acute care hospital, right? So just be really open-minded, and then just know that's temporary, and eventually you'll land the job that you want to get at, right? That's how I'd start off. I started off as a pharmacy director at a small hospital, albeit I had no connections. Like I'm the worst networker ever. Like I had a friend, a classmate, like he was such a great networker, which was his superpower. Like he got was an intern at Kaiser, became a director at Kaiser, and like he's always just worked for really great like hospitals. And for me, I've worked for like no name hospitals because I had no connections, and I had to like work my way from the ground up. Where I was working at Kindred, which was not great. I worked at another small hospital, I was bankrupt. I worked at another hospital that was like HMC, which was not great, and then a Surge hospital in Long Beach, and then up in Lancaster, right? So I got to work my way up, which takes longer. I mean, I'll eventually get there, but if you're smart, you would network better. So that's what kind of leads me to another thing is, for job positions in every industry, I hate to say it, it's not, you heard the adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So, like for me, after I graduated, I just knew all my preceptors at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. So when a graveyard position came, I applied. They knew who I was as a student. They liked me as a student. So when I interviewed for graveyard, it felt like a formality, but they gave me the job offer. And it's because they knew who I was, right? Because I was already there as a student. And I really made an effort to like network with my preceptors, network with other pharmacists so that they would, like me, know me. And also selfishly, I want to learn from them because I always like to pick people's brains who are further along down the road compared to me. Right. So I always kind of had that mindset most of the time. So, yeah, I mean, that's really what's important. And like I said, I was terrible at networking. Right. So you can network by, if you're in a fraternity, which I wasn't, if you were part of an organization, like a pharmacy organization, which I wasn't, this is how you can expedite your journey for that. Or if you know a lot of like pharmacy directors and managers, because it's a small world, right? Like it's really a small world. Like for me, I had connections in NorCal, but when I moved to SoCal, I started back at zero. I knew nobody, right? So I remember when I was at Lancaster, I applied for every job I saw like in Los Angeles because I didn't want to commute 70 miles anymore. And I wanted to like eventually buy a house in Los Angeles where I'm currently staying. And I just remember like applying, and it's like so discouraging because like, at this point you have a decent resume of 11 years as a pharmacist, 7 years in pharmacy leadership. I have master's degree, I have certifications, whatever. On paper, I look good, right? Or good enough for at least a phone conversation. But it's very discouraging where like a lot of them don't even reply to you. And you eventually know who gets hired because it's such a small world. And oftentimes the person that's hired may have less experience than you, may not be as good as you, but what did they have? They had connections, right? So that's what I mean. They had connections and they know people. So people would rather hire somebody that they kind of already know. They may not be the greatest, but they already know them versus like hiring someone brand new who could be better or could be worse, right? So they want that safe bet. So I've seen it so many times. Like I applied for one position that was over 2 new hospitals that were being, start up two new hospitals that were being started up, and they literally hired somebody to be the director of those two hospitals who had zero leadership experience, and they didn't even interview me, who had 7 years of experience. So I'm not taking it personally, because I know it's just a game, right? Like, it's just right time, right place, right opportunity. And I know for the most part, like, a lot of times when you interview, it's a formality. Like, I've been part of that. Like, I don't know how many interviews I've done where, let's say I'm like applying for a director of pharmacy position, and then literally I go in and I realize that there's like multiple assistant directors, and they've been there for 20 years, and one of them applied to the job. So I'm like, I already kind of know, like, all right, well, I'm literally a formality interview, first of all, right? Because like, if you didn't hire someone who has been there for 20 years, it's almost kind of like a slap in the face from the organization, right? Like, how would you feel if you've been there for 20 years and maybe you're decent, and they wouldn't promote you up, right? So either A, you're terrible, or B, you don't have the right personality, or C, I don't even know what C is, right? But like, yeah, it's just a huge slap in the face if you don't get hired. So like, oftentimes the moment they tell me, oh yeah, like, this is like someone internal, and they applied, I'm like, okay, I'm just a formality, which is fine. But like, to me, I'm so time conscious and efficient that, like, dude, like, why'd you bring me on site for an interview if you know you're gonna hire someone internally? Just do a phone call interview with me, so I don't have to like take a day off from work, wear a suit, drive there, wait in line, interview. It's just a lot of work in general, right? And I don't mind doing it, but like, I just would prefer to have a legitimate shot if possible. If I'm just a quota for external candidates, like, just give me a phone interview and that's it, right? No harm, no foul. Not much time was committed. So for me, it kind of irked me, but hey, you have to play the game, right? Like, if there's an interview, you show up. And a lot of times, like, on other jobs, like you said, it's really who you know. So people get jobs, they may not be smarter than you, they may be less experienced than you, but they know somebody. So that's why, like, if I were to go back and tell myself in pharma school, like, man, be better at networking. Like, I was terrible at that, and I was the kind of like the lone wolf guy, like. So anyways, may have worked out for me today, because I was put through a lot of hardship, obviously, and that helped me grow as a person, and then helped me grow into like real estate, like, which is where I invest a lot in today. So like I said, I literally applied for like I forgot, it must have been like 12 positions. I got 12 interviews, and like I would interview, and half the time, like, it would be, oh, they have an internal candidate. The other half the time, they hire someone who they knew. So like, even the job that I got like today, like, I was surprised. Like, this type of larger institutions, they don't usually hire external, they usually hire internal only. So I legitimately thought I was just a quota once again, and you just go through the motions. You get a little bit jaded going through the process, right? Even for the job I had at Lancaster, I interviewed for the director position, but they ended up promoting the assistant director to director. Then they asked me, oh, you just didn't become the assistant director. So a lot of times they sometimes do a bait and switch too, where if they want to interview you, but if they end up promoting internally, there might be a vacancy at that point, at which point they want to bring you on. So that's another like possibility. But for me, once again, I just wish they'd be like more transparent about it, because like, I'm literally applying for a director position, but then now they're trying to sell me an assistant director position. So just be open, transparent. But hey, I get it. Each hiring manager is different, the same. Like, I'm just very transparent, right? Like, that's the way I am, and the way I lead. So yeah, that's kind of the reality of it. Trying to go into some of the interviews. So for me, a lot of pharmacists, they struggle with communication. I get it. Like, pharmacists, we're naturally very introverted, we're shy, we don't communicate as well. That's why we're in pharmacy, right, to begin with. But a lot of pharmacists, they're bad at like talking, interviewing. Like, I've been through so many interviews, and like, most of the time the interviews are very like generic. They don't really say anything that helps them stand out. And I remember for me, when I was interviewing, I always learned how to like story tell something to make it more memorable, right? And I guess that translates well to YouTube. Is I like to tell stories to like share what I've done, what I've been through, how I solve problems, right? And how that kind of reflects who I am as a pharmacist. So, what I would encourage pharmacists to do is just practice interviewing. Like, just interview for a lot of jobs. Eventually you get better, and learn to story tell, right? Like a lot of pharmacists, they're terrible at interviewing, but it's fine. I think a lot of people are just terrible at interviewing in general, but just learn the story, and it's really all it is, right? And I get it. There's a lot of pharmacists where had terrible interviews, but they end up being great pharmacists. But like you said, you only have like an hour to like prove yourself to a hiring manager if you're worth hiring, right? Between your resume, your interview, that's it. And maybe some references, but of course references, you're always going to get people that favor you or like you. So yeah, that's just kind of the harsh reality. So, because I knew like I was bad at networking, and because I knew that it's even more competitive in Southern California, like that's why I really doubled down on like I need multiple streams of income, especially getting laid off. And I was just like, you know what? I got to do real estate. I got to do social media. I want to be a realtor. So for me, I don't want to depend on one source of income, which is my W-2 right now, to provide for me in the future, right? So that's why I'm doing all the above, where I'm still working full-time as a pharmacist. I own a bunch of 52 units of real estate, and I'm trying to create content that will funnel into my other future businesses of coaching, mentorship, becoming a realtor, wherever that looks like. So yeah, that's really, really the importance. So anyways, if you want to learn how to buy some multifamily real estate with some guidance, check out the mentorship program. I also offer one-on-one coaching. If you want coaching about becoming a pharmacist, you can sign up as well. Most people come from me for real estate, but I've been a pharmacist for quite a while now, and I've been a pharmacy director, manager for 7 years now. So if you want interview tips, schedule a coaching call. But anyways, let me know what questions you have. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you so much.